Fichte, A History of Modern Philosophy, Book 12. The critical philosophy won its first success in Germany less as a new epistemology than as what in fact its author meant it to be, a rehabilitation of religious belief. The limits of reason had been drawn so closely only to make room for faith. But the current of rationalism was running too strongly to be so summarily stopped, and so with Kant's successors, faith is altogether abandoned, while the claims of reason are pushed relentlessly through. Among these more logical thinkers, the first is J.G. Fichte, 1762 to 1814. In him, for the third time in modern history, for the first and last time in Germany, the hero as philosopher finds a worthy representative. Born in Silesia, like Kant of humble parentage, and bred in circumstances of more oppressive poverty, he also received a severely religious and moral training as a preparation for the pastoral office. The bounty of an aristocratic patron gave him an excellent public school education. But as a university student, first at Jena and then at Leipzig, he had to earn a scanty living by private tuition, finally abandoning his destined career to accept a post in a Swiss family at Zurich. There, as the result of an attachment in which the love was nearly all on the lady's side, he became engaged to a niece of the poet Klopstock, and after a long delay, caused by money difficulties, was enabled to marry her. In the meantime, he had become a convert to Kant's philosophy, winning the admiration of Theold, master himself, by a critique of all revelation, written in 4 weeks. Published anonymously by an oversight, it was generally attributed to Kant himself, and, on Therial authorship becoming known, won for Fichte an extraordinary professorate of philosophy at Jena, where his success as a lecturer and writer gave him for a time the leadership in German speculation, 1794 to 1799. An untoward incident brought this stage of his career to an end. Writing in a philosophical review, he defined God as the moral order of the universe. Dr. Temple long afterwards used much the same phrase when Bishop of Exeter, finding it, presumably, compatible with official theism, but such was not the impression created in Saxony. A cry of atheism arose, much to the disgust of Fichte, whose position would have been better described as pantheistic. But what incensed him most was the suspicion of an attempt to interfere with the liberty of academic teaching. With his usual impetuosity, he talked about resigning his chair, with a hint that others would follow his example, were the authorities at Weimar to permit such an outrage. Goethe, who was then minister, observed that no government could allow itself to be threatened, and Fichte was at once relieved of his post. Settling at Berlin, he became professor of philosophy in the new university, founded after the French conquest of Prussia, having previously done much to revive the national spirit by his addresses to the German nation, 1807 to 1808. These were in appearance the program of a new educational utopia, but their real purpose was so evident that the speaker lived in daily expectation of being summoned before a French court-martial and shot. Unlike his countrymen, Goethe, Hegel, and Schopenhauer, Fichte passionately resented the Napoleonic despotism, throwing himself heart and soul into the great uprising by which it was finally overthrown. Although his wish to accompany the victorious army as field preacher could not be gratified, the campaign of 1813 still claimed him as one of its victims. After nursing his heroic wife to recovery from a hospital fever, caught in attendance on the sick and wounded at Berlin, he took the infection from her and died early in 1814, soon after hearing that Blücher had crossed the Rhine. G.H. Lewis, in a well-known story, has made himself and his readers merry over a German savant who undertakes to evolve the idea of a camel out of the depths of his moral consciousness. The phrase is commonly quoted as inner consciousness, but this takes away its whole point. For the original satirist, who I think was not Lewis but Heine, had in view the philosophy of Fichte. It need hardly be said that German savants are as careful observers and diligent collectors of facts as any others, and Fichte in particular trusted solely to experience for the knowledge of natural phenomena. But even as regards his general philosophy, the place it gives to morality has been misconceived even by his closest students. With him, goodwill really plays a less important part than with Kant, being not an end in itself, but a means towards an end. And what that end is, his teaching makes quite clear. Kant's first critics put their finger on the weak point of his system, the thing in itself. So, assuming it to be discarded, Fichte set to work on new lines, the lines of pure idealism. But though an idealist, he is not, any more than Berkeley, a solipsist. The celebrated antithesis of the ego and the non-ego dates from him and strikes the keynote of his whole system. It might be thought that, as compared with the old realism, this was a distinction without a difference. But that is not so, for according to Fichte, the non-ego is subjective in its origin, and that is where he departs widely from Berkeley's theological idealism. Not that I create the not myself, I assume it as the condition of my self-consciousness, a remarkable feat of logic, but after all not more wonderful than that space and time should result from the activity of the outer and inner senses. This figment of my imagination is anyhow solid enough to beget a new feeling of resistance and recoil, throwing the self back on itself, and bringing with it the interpretation of that external impact by the category of causation, of its own activity as substance, and of the whole deal between the ego and the non-ego as interaction or reciprocity. In this way, the first triad of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is obtained, and from this, by a vast expenditure of ingenuity, the whole array of Kant's forms, categories, and faculties is evolved as a coherent system of scientific thought in obedience to a single principle, the self-realization of the ego, alternatively admitting and transcending a limit to its activity. It will be easily understood that this self-realizing ego is neither Fichte's nor anyone else's self, but a universal principle, fundamentally the same in all. One is reminded of Descartes' self-thinking thought by which the reality of the universe was guaranteed. But between the two, there is this vast difference that the Frenchman's ego resembles a box containing a variety of independent ideas to be separately handled and examined. The German's is a box enclosing a coiled-up spring by the expansion of which all the wheels of the philosophical machine are made go round. From the action of the not-self on the self results the whole of nature as we conceive it. From the reaction of the self on the not-self, the whole mentality and morality of man. Morality being understood to include the domestic, social, political, educational, and industrial organization of life. The final cause, the impelling ideal of existence, is the self-realization of the ego, the entire absorption into its personal energy of the non-ego, of nature, to be effected by perfect knowledge of how the physical universe is constituted, issuing in perfect subjugation of its forces to the human will. But such a realization of the absolute ego would mean its annihilation. For, as we have seen, the antithesis between objective and subjective is the very condition of consciousness, that without which it could neither begin nor continue to exist. Therefore the process must go on forever, and this necessity guarantees the eternal duration of the human race, not, as Kant had dreamed, of the individual soul, since for Fichte the categorical imperative demands a consummation widely different from that combination of virtue with happiness which had satisfied his master. And the agency by which it is being effected through infinite time is not a personal God, but that moral order of the world which Fichte regarded as the only true object of religious feeling. As for human immortality, he seems to have first accepted, but afterwards rejected it in favor of a mystical union with the divine. It has been said that morality was not with Fichte what it had been with Kant, the highest good. Nevertheless, as a means towards the final synthesis, morality interested him intensely, and his best work has been done in ethics. As a condition of self-realization, the primal ego becomes personified in a multitude of free individualities. Just as in Stoicism, Each individual is conceived as having a special office to perform in the world process, and the state exists, ideally speaking, in order to guarantee the necessary independence of all its citizens. For this purpose, everyone must have the right to work and the right to a living wage. Thus, Fichte appears as the first theorist of state socialism in the history of German thought. Probably the example of the Greek Stoics with their communistic utopias acting on a kindred spirit rather than any prophetic vision of the coming century is to be credited for this remarkable anticipation.